We begin with Martin Barron, executive editor of the Washington Post. Marty joined the Post in 2012 after 11 years as editor of the Boston Globe. Movie buffs will recognize Marty as the hero of Spotlight, the Oscar-nominated story of the Globe during his tenure there. More to the point of our narrative, Marty is now in the midst of reinventing the Washington Post, transforming it from a print legend to a digital powerhouse while putting out a world-class newspaper every day. Last October, for the first time ever, the Post beat the New York Times in website traffic, and they're still neck and neck. It's a new model of journalism, a new way of doing business, and an example to any institution striving to preserve its best traditions while accommodating profound change to secure a successful future. Please join me in welcoming Marty Barron. Come on up, Marty. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, welcome. It's nice to have you here, Marty.
Thanks for having me.
I've got a few questions I'm going to ask, and then we'll be happy to open the mics to anyone else who might have a question for our distinguished guest here. Marty, I see a lot of interesting words associated with the Washington Post nowadays. Words like bandito, and arc, and flex play, and re-engage, which are quite different than the vocabulary we had when I was at the Washington Post Company. How is the Post transforming itself from a print legend to a digital powerhouse?
Well, the words that you mentioned sort of refer to how we feel that we need to be at the technological edge. We don't feel that we can follow other people. We feel that we have to have the technological resources in-house, and in order to do what we need to do and do it quickly. And that's part of the approach that we've taken. We have a fantastic technology team in-house at the Post. And Jeff Bezos, when he visited us a week or so ago for our grand opening of our new offices here, talked about how our technology team is as good as anything that they have at Amazon. We spoke very proudly of it.
Well done.
So that's an important part of it. But let me take you back a little bit to when he bought us, and the deal closed in October of 2013, October 1st. And at that point, he invited us to go out to Seattle, asked us to come up with ideas. And the basic approach was that we were no longer just going to be a news organization focused on Washington, to be for and about Washington, which was our theme at that point. And there was a desire for us to think expansively to think about how we could be a national and even international news organization. And obviously, everything we wanted to do, and the way to do that was to be fully digital, and to think about what would appeal to a national audience and also what would appeal to a younger audience. Because if we didn't cultivate a younger audience now, we weren't going to have an audience in the future, and so that was very important. So, you know, we thought through that, and a lot of what we did was really look at, we came with our own ideas, he had his ideas, and eventually what emerged was a combination of the two. And a lot of it was looking at what's working internally and what's working, what are other people doing that's working, and what new ideas might we have. A lot of what was working internally were new forms of storytelling. We had some examples of that. Wonk Blog, which was then being run by Ezra Klein, was an example of that. There were some other examples of that, some really great blogs that we had that were generating a disproportionate amount of traffic. And what was the common element of those blogs was that they were people essentially who had grown up, they were being run by people and written by people who had grown up essentially in a web universe of news. They had not generally come up through newspapers or other traditional media, and they wrote differently. They wrote in a much more conversational style, in a much more accessible style, in a style that deployed all of the new tools that are available to us on the web these days. And we thought of new things that we might do in that fashion. And then also we recognized that, you know, in the current era, things are happening so fast that we can't just wait for us to get around to doing a story. What was happening is that we were running stories, and then immediately somebody would aggregate us. They would pick up our story, and they might actually get more traffic than we did. And one of the questions, you may be familiar with this concept. So one of the things that we thought through was to what extent should we aggregate more and how to go about that. And we do aggregate more, and we do try to add value, to put it in our own style. We do additional reporting. We do all of that, but we don't do every last piece of reporting ourselves. And so we created a bunch of initiatives. We started an overnight team that really scans the world and the web for great stories that we ought to be pursuing that haven't been pursued by our staff during the day. We have a breaking news team that not only responds to obvious breaking news, but also mines the social conversation, looking for stories that are not coming out of institutions in Washington or major institutions around the country, but are stories that are really percolating at the grassroots level. We started something called Post Everything, which is sort of, in a way, kind of our answer to what Huffington Post was when it started, which was inviting other people to comment on our site, to use our site as a commenting platform, as a platform for telling stories. And we thought we could do it differently and maybe do it better. And that's been very successful. And in many ways, some of the most successful things are ordinary people telling their stories, sort of personal memoirs written in the moment with our help in terms of writing and conceptualizing how those things should be written. So we started a whole bunch of new blogs. And we hired for those and had a bunch of new people, probably a net 70 people in the first full year. But about 50 of those were really, were product oriented, 20 people were product oriented, but 50 people were journalists of one type or another, and they were all digitally oriented. And we hired a lot of people who grew up as journalists, as I say, not in the world of traditional newspapers, but grew up as journalists in the world of the web. And they have a very different approach. And I think that's an important point that needs to be made, is that the web is a new medium. It's just in the same way that television was a new medium when it came into existence, and radio was a new medium when it came into existence. You know, what you do on radio is not the same as what you do in a newspaper. What you do on television is not the same script that you would use on radio. And so along comes the web, and what did we all do? We all put our same style,
yes, we did.
Put it on the web. And that's not the answer. We have to think of it differently. And I think mobile will be different too, and it's already becoming different. And keep in mind that probably, half the people who come to us these days are coming via mobile devices. They're reading us as they're waiting in a grocery line or walking down the street, as we often know, often running into us. So this calls for a different approach. And so we think all the time about different storytelling forms.
Well, that's interesting, but you're also putting out a newspaper every day, and you're going 60 miles an hour doing that. And I assume you can't just do all this by executive fiat. We're going to do this now. You have to get buy-in from your colleagues and so forth. What kind of cultural and operational and financial barriers have you had to overcome to get to where you're going?
Well, executive fiat would be nice if it worked. It doesn't work that way, as you suggest. I think you do have to have honest conversations with people about just the way things are today, and talk about how people are getting their information. Just point out that some of our competitors are succeeding when we're not. And talk about what are the consequences of that if we don't adapt. Just frank and honest conversations with evidence, I think, helps a lot. That's I think, extremely important. And then call upon everybody to contribute. On top of that, I think that bringing in new people who do things in a different way helps tremendously, because it provides examples internally of how things can work. These are serious journalists. They deal in serious subjects. We're not talking about clickbait. We're talking about different storytelling forms. And when you have those people in-house and they show how they can succeed on the web, succeed digitally, then they provide an example to everybody else in the room, and you can point to those examples. And journalists are driven by a lot of different things. One is that they certainly want an audience for themselves. And two is they may be envious of other people's audience that they feel that they should have. They want to be recognized as the expert. And my view is that the people who are on our staff should be recognized as the experts in their field, because in fact, for the most part, they are the experts in their field. And we should not allow people who work for our competitors, who don't have the experience, who don't have the expertise, to supplant people who really are great in their fields. So my view is you need to be expert. You need to be the voice. Here's what you need to do in order to be the go-to person and to be the authority on these subjects. And so we do have these regular conversations. We also do measure people's performance, for sure. Now, we don't set quotas for people in terms of how much they should produce in terms of traffic and things like that. But we do want to see evidence that everybody is contributing to the effort. We don't want people to think that this is somebody else's problem. Go hire the digital people. They'll take care of the digital stuff. It's not my problem. It is everybody's challenge, and everybody needs to make a contribution, and we view it that way. So, every 6 months or so, we do look at what kinds of contributions people are making, and we look at people who are star performers, so we make sure that we reward them in some way. And then we look at people who are at the bottom, who, given the nature of their job, should be making a greater contribution to our digital effort. And then we have conversations with them about what they need to do. The people who are in the vast middle, we don't pay that much attention to. As long as it looks like somebody is making an enormous effort, a serious effort, then we're fine with that. We recognize that somebody who's covering local schools is not going to generate the traffic of somebody who's covering Donald Trump. And we don't expect them to be the same by any means. And I have no idea how to set quotas for these individuals. What I want to see is, I recognize that it's my responsibility. I'm making an effort. I'm learning how to do this. And then we also do a lot of training. We have people internally who are doing a lot of training of others. We have an audience team that's now about, I don't know exactly what it is right now. It's about 12 to 15 people on that team. And they specialize in social media and how social media works and what kinds of headlines might work in social media, how to produce stories so that they gain traction in social media. And they act as advisors to everybody on the staff. We listen to them very closely. And you can see many instances, for example, where just a simple change in a headline will produce substantial gains in actual traffic. So Bandito that you mentioned, interesting name, but it is basically a way of testing different headlines and different approaches. And when we see that one is working better than the other, the new approach that works better takes over on our website.
And how is this working in terms of trying to monetize this audience, which is kind of the holy grail of the new newspaper industry, I assume. And Jeff Bezos, your new owner, although this is, it's a private investment and not Amazon, he did invent Amazon and knows something about monetizing audiences. How is that working for you? I know that's not strictly your job, but I'm sure.
Well, it's become my job and part of my job. And to think about it at the very least, I'm not divorced from it. This notion in the past that there was a wall between the news side and the business side. There are, appropriate responsibilities for each, and there are things where, principles that we have, obviously, in the newsroom that we're not going to allow to be violated. That said, we obviously have conversations with the business side about what its needs are and how we might be helpful. So, without violating any principles whatsoever of independence. So, I think we see a couple of things that we need to do. First of all, we want to build a very large audience, and we have, as you mentioned. In October we passed the New York Times in terms of traffic generated here in the United States. And we went as high as 76 million. We fell back a little bit in the month of January because of some methodological changes by ComScore. But we're going very strong this month, and I would expect us to continue growing. We're growing pretty much at the rate of 70% year over year in terms of domestic digital traffic. So it's been very good. One of the things we want to do is have more people see us. The Washington Post was a place where people knew about it, had a reputation primarily because of Watergate. That goes back a few years. And in the intervening years, we sort of concentrated here on Washington, and we did not build a brand nationally the way that perhaps we might have, or that some people say we should have. But now we are. And so what we want to do now is get a lot of people to try us, to see us, and see how we're different from the New York Times. And ideally they'll like us. And as I think they should. and then you want to build a loyalty to say, yeah, I like going back to the Washington Post. In fact, I liked it so much that I want to be a subscriber. Now, the number of subscribers is going to be small, obviously, in comparison to the total numbers of people who will try us out. But we can build our subscriber base by having more and more people try us. And so we see monetization in terms of the advertising that comes with having a large audience. And then we also see monetization in terms of building a loyal subscriber base for people who are particularly attracted to us and want essentially everything that we have to offer. And that's really what we're working on.
Well, this is kind of an unfair question, but are there any lessons that you have learned in this experience at the Post that might be adaptable to those of us in public television who are trying to reinvent ourselves and expand our service and such?
Sure. Well, as I was listening to you speak, I was thinking probably the worst thing you can do in terms of your efforts on Congress is to be taking advice from the Washington Post. But wait till the word gets out, right. So don't tell anybody, you know. But I think that, as I said before, I think the most important lesson here is that, or a couple of lessons is, one is that the nature of storytelling is changing dramatically, fundamentally. That what we're dealing with here is at least one new medium and maybe two. So the web and mobile, and that we have to think about those differently from how we think about broadcast, radio, and print. And I think that's what we're doing. We had an example of that recently where it was called Waypoint, and it was about the island of Lesbos, where so many immigrants from Syria and elsewhere and Iraq are coming over and then making their way into Europe, its island Greece. So it was totally video-driven. You could walk your way through from one video to the next. The amount of text was minimal. At various points, it would ask you if you wanted to know more, and then it would take you to another video which actually explained it to you. And so, the idea of being video-driven is something relatively new for an organization that was a newspaper for decades and decades. So, but it worked really well. It was beautifully done. It was easy to follow. It was highly instructive, and it was educational, I think, in the way that all of you are thinking about. And so I think those kinds of storytelling forms work really well. We use a lot of graphics in our people love graphics. And we use graphics in Wonk blog and in our science blog. Sometimes the graphics dominate over the actual text. And we use original documents, annotations of original documents with tools like Genius, and where you're annotating individual words and saying, okay, well, let's elaborate on that. What does that really mean? Right. And it's very interactive in the way that you were talking about earlier. So I think that's really important. And the other, I think, great lesson is that, so that's on the editorial side of things. And then technology, as I said before, I think it's really important that news organizations be absolutely at the cutting edge of technology. We've put ourselves so often in the position of being simply buying what vendors have to offer, and then when we need to make changes very quickly, we can't do it because the vendor will only do something that 50, 80, 100 people want. And so we're very much a captive of what those vendors are doing. So I think to the degree that you can develop your own technology, put yourself at the leading edge of technology and come up with solutions and move quickly technologically, I think that would be very important.
That's great. Who has a question for Marty Barron? I'm sorry, I can't see very well. Okay, hi. Yes, ma'am.
Marty, Kathleen Developer from WITF Harrisburg.
Hi.
You said that when Bezos bought the paper, the Washington Post thought of itself as devoted to coverage of Washington, D.C. The implication is that you define your service area differently, perhaps not even geographically. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The way it was described at the time was the Washington Post would be for and about Washington. So obviously there were elements of Washington that had national consequence. We all know what those are. But there's also a community here. So when he came in, he felt that that was too limiting in terms of what our opportunities would be, and that the challenges for local news organizations, and you may have a follow-up question on this, are greater than they are for a national news organization. We're one of the few news organizations that has the opportunity to really become national and international. certainly with the name The Washington Post, certainly with the sort of the portfolio that we already had, we have the capacity to actually turn ourselves into a national and international news organization in a way that maybe the Boston Globe doesn't have, my former employer, because it's in Boston, or the Los Angeles Times, or the Miami Herald, mentioning all the places I've been before, but that applies to a lot of other newspapers. So he wanted to take advantage of that opportunity for us, and so that's what we've tried to do. And as I said, all of our initiatives were really oriented around digital, because that gives us the opportunity. We don't have to have to do all of this with a print edition anymore. We don't have to piggyback on the production facilities of newspapers all over the country, and people can come to us digitally, and we can make ourselves available to them digitally, push out our content on social media, and whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Reddit or you name it, Google search or whatever it might be. To push ourselves out to people so that they can find us, because increasingly people aren't coming to us for information. We have to get our information to them, and so that's been the shift, is to think of ourselves nationally and even internationally.
And in what year will the Post cease print publication?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I mean, I think it'll be longer than people expect. Look, everybody's predicted our death so many times already. I actually think we're more resilient than people give us credit for, and that we give ourselves credit for. And I think we've demonstrated that, the fact that news organizations like ours still do sort of set the news agenda, and that's true of major metro newspapers as well. I think the thing about print is I wouldn't want to set a date on it. But I do think that it's going to become a smaller and smaller part of our business. It's still an incredibly important part of our business in terms of overall revenues. On the other hand, we're not going to grow there. So ultimately, we have to grow. We have to increase the size of our audience, and we have to be where the readers are, where the users are, whatever you want to call them, the audience is. And they are on digital platforms, primarily increasingly on the smartphone. And that is where people are. I know from a previous visit that I made out to Silicon Valley, we talked to a lot of VC companies just to see what they were saying. And one of the major VC companies said, we won't fund anything unless it works on mobile, period. If it doesn't work on mobile, we won't do it. And they showed us all their projections of mobile usage around the country, in the United States, and around the world, and how that's going to grow. And you just look at your own habits. Look at the habits of your kids and your colleagues. And mobile is essentially where it's at.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Rick Schneider from...
Oh, sorry, Rich, excuse me. I really can't see that far.
Okay. Hi, Pat. Marty, I'm local here at WETA, so you're my local paper, and I'm a digital and paper subscriber and a big fan. One of the things we pride ourselves on in public television is civility, and in the NewsHour, for example, that's one of sort of our core values and what people think about with Judy and Gwen, and that brings me to online comments in newspaper stories. And I wonder what your feeling is about the importance of it. I've seen different papers take different approaches. Is that going to, do you have any different thinking of it, or the importance of it?
Right. Well, I recognize the importance of civility, and as you were saying that, I was thinking, I wonder how you're covering the campaign. But it's sort of slipped over into incivility. Look, comments are, for the most part, a sewer, but there are lots of people there, and people want to have their say. And so we want people to have their say. We want to be sort of democratic, small d, in that way. We don't want to seem like we're some sort of fortress, and we don't allow people to weigh in on the work we're doing. So what we're doing is we're working with, we and the New York Times jointly applied for a grant with the Knight Foundation, and we're working with the Mozilla Foundation, which is sort of administering the whole thing and helping as well. And we're trying to develop a better way of curating comments so that the more intelligent comments surface, regardless of what their point of view is, the more literate comments, the more civil comments, all of those surface, and that we actually promote a civic conversation in comments. That, there was a little bit of delay in getting that off the ground, but it is well underway right now. They feel that they're making good progress. I would expect that sometime this year, we would actually see results of that. And will be open source, because the Knight Foundation only does things that are open source. And we have solicited the participation of smaller news organizations around the country at Knight's insistence, and we're happy to do that. And so my hope is that out of that we will allow people to comment on our stories as they wish, but also promote a more civil conversation. We're not there yet, but I hope we will be.
Roy Clem.
Yes, Roy Clem from Alabama Public Television. I can hold it. Thank you. Just a quick question. What would you say to a young person who's thinking about becoming a journalist, but that person says to you, I'm a little bit concerned because of the polls where I see journalists aren't held in as high a regard as they once were, for example, when I was young and Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America?
Right. Well, I usually hear about job opportunities rather than trust when people are thinking about whether to get into the field. You know, in the area of trust, I think it's a serious issue for us. I don't know that I have an answer for what to do about it, other than to do our jobs and do it well. And you know, my view is that a lot of institutions have really taken a hit in terms of public esteem. Politicians have, courts have, everybody, business has, pretty much every profession except the military has taken a huge hit. And I think that's sort of emblematic of what's happening in our society today. So we're not really an outlier in that respect. In terms of what we should do, I mean, I think we have to approach our work in the way that we should. We should approach our work and do it honestly, honorably, fairly, and accurately. And I think that, but in the end of the day, we should also do it straightforwardly and unflinchingly. And I think we have to tell people what we find. I think that people know when we're trying to pander to them, or I think people, they reject the idea of sort of soft pedaling what we've found. And I think we just have to be honest about what we've done. We have to go into things with an open mind. I mean, obviously you don't even pursue a story without a hypothesis, so that there's a story there. But we have to go in with an open mind, open to what arguments that people make and facts that people present to you. And as I said, approach that honestly, honorably, fairly, and accurately. But in the end, let's tell things the way what we've actually learned, and say it in a straightforward way.
Pat.
Yes, I don't think we should allow you to leave without one question about Spotlight. And what I'd like to know is how you found the courage and stamina to pursue that story in an environment that perhaps wasn't very encouraging.
Right. Well, if anybody here can vote in the Academy Awards, anyway, you know, I mean, just the history of how that got started. How many people here have seen the movie?
Everybody.
Good. I see a few people who haven't. Please go. I mean, the way that it started is when I got to Boston, just the day before I started, there was a column that appeared in the Boston Globe written by Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Eileen McNamara. I'm sure John has had Eileen on his station from time to time. She's a very forceful columnist, and she talked about the case of one priest by the name of John Gagan, who had been accused of abusing as many as 80 kids. And she said in that column that the attorney for the plaintiffs, the survivors of abuse, had said that the cardinal himself knew about this abuse, and that his lieutenants knew about this abuse, and yet they reassigned this priest from parish to parish without any notification to parishioners or even to other parish priests, and essentially allowing him to abuse again and again and again. And then the attorney for the church said that these were baseless charges, these were irresponsible charges. And at the end of the column, she said, the truth may never be known, because the internal church documents that might reveal the truth are under court seal, under a confidentiality order. And so at my first meeting, on my first day at the Boston Globe, our 10:30 news meeting, where I was just getting to know people, we went around the table as portrayed in the movie, and everybody talked about what they were working on, and nobody mentioned the case of John Gagan. And I had read this column, and I said, well, what are we doing to follow up on this column? On the one hand, you have one side saying one thing, that the cardinal himself knew about this abuse and allowed him to be reassigned. And you have the other side saying that's totally untrue. Can't we actually get at the truth of this? And somebody pointed out that the documents were under seal, and I said that I knew that because I'd read it in the column. But I didn't know the laws of Massachusetts, but in Florida, we would have been inclined to perhaps file a motion to unseal the documents. Now, Florida has a very expansive public records law, and these are not public records, these are private records of the church. On the other hand, our culture would have been to, and anytime something is sealed that's in the public interest, we would have sought to unseal it. And so, so I said this, had we considered doing this? And there was dead silence in the room. I think people were a little surprised that there's this new editor on his first day at his first meeting talked about filing a motion against the single most powerful institution in Boston. So I said, well, why don't we have a meeting afterwards? And then we decided to go ahead on two tracks. One was talking to our counsel about filing a motion to unseal the documents, and then separately doing a really thorough investigation of what was happening in the church and whether John Gagan, what was the culpability in the case of John Gagan, but also ultimately whether there was a bigger pattern at play. And in terms of, so people have asked me, well, why did you decide to go after the Catholic Church as soon as you arrived in Boston? And my answer to that is I did not decide to go after the Catholic Church as soon as I arrived in Boston. I decided to pursue a story that was in front of us that needed to be pursued to find the truth. I mean, when somebody says the truth may never be known, that should be chum to journalists. I mean, it really should. I mean, we should go after that. And so I wanted to find out what the truth is. I wanted to pursue a story. I didn't want to pursue the church. It just so happened that it was the church. And, people have said, well, how do you have, as you asked the question, how did you have the courage to do that? And I feel very uncomfortable with the word courage in this instance, and I feel very uncomfortable with people who say, oh, you were heroes or things like that. First of all, to me, heroes are people who put their lives and their livelihoods and those of their families at stake, and I didn't do that. But in terms of, I view it as, instead of courage, as a willingness to do our jobs. That is our job. And holding powerful and making sure that we never we never decide not to do our jobs, even if it's the most powerful institution in our community. Because when it is the most powerful institution in our community, or a powerful institution in our country or in the world, we have a special obligation to do it. We can't sort of avert our eyes and go elsewhere. We have a particular obligation to hold people accountable when there is evidence of wrongdoing. And that's what motivated me. And I viewed it as just doing my job as a journalist. And I think that's the way we all ought to view it.
Wow.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well,
We have a question here.
all right.
There's a question here.
Oh, wait, all right, we're going to have one more. That's all we can do. Tom.
James Morges from
Oh, James, I'm sorry.
KUED Salt Lake. Can we talk a little bit more about the business model?
Sure.
Is a subscription conditional access? Is it a membership? Where exactly is the money flowing into?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. What do you?
If you are a subscriber, does that mean you receive the news service on the web, or do you put it out there regardless? How do you make your money?
Well, we have different subscriptions, types of subscriptions that give you access to different things. Some are, subscription to the app. Some are the subscription to our website and every product that we have. There are varying things that you can subscribe to at varying price levels. So we have that. We have a special app that we first introduced for the Kindle Fire, but now is available on iOS and Android, which is a magazine-style presentation of the Post. It's very, very visual. and very designed and not targeted at traditional consumers of newspapers. It's targeted at people who have a more casual involvement with the news. And we first introduced that to Kindle Fire, people who had the Kindle Fire, and they got an introductory price called $0, and then they got an introductory price called $1, and then for 6 months, and then they get a real price, okay? So part of it is to try to draw people in and get them to try us out, because people hadn't tried us out before. I mean, coming in immediately with a full price, all it did was dissuade people. They had to sort of somehow calculate in their own minds that, yeah, this is going to be so attractive to me that I'm going to pay the full price right away. And so our approach was, we'll go easy on that. We want them to try us, taste us, experiment with us, see if they like us, then pay a little bit to see what that feels like, and then actually charge them real price. And so that's what we've done on that particular product. So, people who don't pay, they get access to 5 stories a month. And obviously there are ways, we all know that there are ways to get in if you want to do that. I've done that. But that's essentially it. It's 5 stories a month. And, we don't actually disclose our numbers of subscribers. I assume that someday we will when we want to. But we don't actually disclose it in our circulation numbers, but we're pleased with the growth of subscribers. We also recognize that we have a ways to go, and the hope is that by getting more and more people to try us, more people liking us, and perhaps liking us better than our competitors, that they will come to us and be willing to pay and support the kind of work that we're doing.
Well, whatever he says, he's my hero. Marty Barron of the Washington Post. Thank you very much. This is great. Thank you, sir.